I feel like over the past year, we've gone from assistants, AI assistants,
Yep.
to AI agents. And that transition was about, okay, how do you get the agent to do work?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
now it's about, okay, we have these agents that do work, but
Yeah.
now how do you perfect them and get them to actually do exactly what you want in the way that you intend for it to do? And I guess my next question would be like, tactically, what does that look like?
The first and most important thing is a very, very clear written set of guidelines for how the agent should think about its goal. And I think one of the things that's really important here is that document, wherever it is, whatever it is, should live in some existing knowledge base that you would otherwise already be using. For some enterprises, this will be GitHub. Maybe for others, it's Confluence. Maybe it's SharePoint sites. Whatever your existing like internal knowledge base is, your like knowledge documentation, keep the set of agent guidelines, agent goals, well defined and written in those existing systems, so that all of your different agents in whatever systems you're building them in can like read from that central repository of truth about what the agent's goal is. That's one really, really important tactical component. And then I think the second really important tactical component is like high quality evaluation, right? So the ability to define a list of evaluation questions. And then I think the other thing that people get wrong here is the ability to define like how to evaluate that in a way that actually makes sense for agents. Like one of the things that I think is different between traditional software and like agents is that for an agent, there's like an infinite number of ways to give the right answer to a question usually, right? If the question is, who's the COO of Creedle, one right answer might be Jessica Shen, one might be Jess Shen, one might be Jessica at Creedle.ai. This is an infinite number of ways to give that answer. And I think the challenge that people have is they want to say like, this is the right answer. And then they want to grade the agent according to how precisely it copied their version of the right answer. But the reality is that's actually quite constraining to the agent, because the agent might actually like have an even better or more precise or at least an equally accurate answer, which is in some way worded slightly differently to yours, right? And so giving the agent like the rubric of what are the characteristics of a good answer, rather than just simply saying this is a good answer, right? And then you've got your evaluation questions, you've got your rubrics for like what makes a high quality response. And then as you make these changes to your harness, being able to like evaluate how those changes are working against a large, like representative set of the types of problems that you need your agent to solve. Obviously answering a question like who's the COO is pretty simple, but if it's a more complicated question like, how do we get Ravin a visa to go to Jordan? Like that's a much more complicated operational flow, and the agent needs to be able to be evaluated in those like difficult circumstances too. So there's clear goals, then there's like clear evaluations. And I think the third thing that's also really important here is the complete tool set. And I think this is one of the things that I see very frequently startups don't quite get right, is that you maybe provide an API endpoint for an AI to use, but the AI has got to somehow guess what all the parameters for this API endpoint are, and it doesn't actually have the context that it needs in order to fill that in. So a really simple example that I see a lot is like whenever you're making a request against the GitHub API, for example, you're supposed to know like what the organization name is and what the repository name is. And, our company's name is Creedle.ai, but our GitHub repository organization is Creedle-AI, right? And if you just naively give the MCP tool or the like GitHub API tools to the agent, it will assume that the correct organization name is Creedle.ai. And if you're not providing it the specific context of like, this is actually the specific way to use this tool, then it's just got no way of knowing what the correct organization name is. And so that's the third part, is providing enough documentation and clarity on what the tools are, as well as, the obvious piece, which is like literally giving it the tool to access GitHub. But then more importantly and more nuanced perhaps is the point that you need to also give it the context and documentation about how to use those tools effectively in your organization. And I think if you have really good documentation, If you have really good evaluations and you have really good, clear outcomes that are stored in your core knowledge bases, then I think you have the workings of all the building blocks to build really awesome agent harnesses across the enterprise.